Hey, everybody. Welcome to Day Drinking with Authors, the interview series where I pick a book and the author picks a drink and we discuss both. I'm Molly Fader, and tonight's guest, this is a repeat performance from Simone St. James. We talked to her with her like juggernaut, the Sunset Motel. No, did I get that wrong? Oh, Simone, I did get it wrong. She's giving me sundown. My memory is perfect, as are my notes. She was here to talk about the Sundown Motel. She's here tonight to talk about the Book of Cold Cases, which is just as chilling, just as suspenseful. There are a lot of things to talk about and to love about this book. If you haven't picked it up, be sure to go grab it. I'm going to read the back cover copy. Mom, you will not like this one. Do not read this one. But my dad would like it. Mom doesn't like people in danger. Anyway, a true crime blogger gets more than she bargained for while interviewing the woman acquitted of 2 cold case slayings in this chilling new novel from the New York Times bestselling author of The Sundown Motel. In 1977, Clear Lake, Oregon was shaken by the Lady Killer murders. 2 men, seemingly randomly, were murdered with the same gun, with strange notes left behind. Beth Greer was a perfect suspect, a rich, eccentric 23-year-old woman seen fleeing one of the crimes. But she was acquitted and she retreated to the isolation of her mansion. Oregon, 2017, Shay Collins is a receptionist, but by night she runs a true crime website, The Book of Cold Cases, a passion fueled by the attempted abduction she escaped as a child. When she meets Beth by chance, Shay asks her for an interview. To Shay's surprise, Beth says yes. They meet regularly at Beth's mansion, though Shay is never comfortable there. Items move when she's not looking, and she could swear she's seen a girl outside the window. The allure of learning the truth about the case from the start, charming Beth, is too much to resist. But even as they grow closer, Shay senses something isn't right. Is she making friends with a manipulative murderer, or are there other dangers lurking in the darkness of the Greer house? That sounds really good. Let's bring in Simone. Hey, Simone.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. You've been like talking to everybody about this book. You're like, I hate this book now. Oh, look at that.
There,
Gorgeous.
I thought I would show the pretty. There we go.
And hardback too.
Oh yeah,
You
it's
fall
beautiful.
asleep.
They did
You
a
fall
great job.
asleep reading that, it's gonna break your nose.
Mhm. Okay, great interview. Talk to you later.
I got the name of your one book wrong
Yeah, it's all
when
right.
I said my mom wouldn't like this book, but she wouldn't. It's too scary.
It is scary.
It is scary. It
Mhm.
is scary. And you have been doing 1,000 of these things. And Simone, for those of you who might not know, Simone and I have known each other for a very long time. We're critique partners. This is not a good time for you.
It's fine. It's the end of release week or the tail end of release week. I've been basically on the internet all week and telling myself I need to get off the internet since Monday night. So
It's just one.
we were
You've been
super
in the same
productive.
shirt.
That's how release week goes. Real
It
productive.
is.
Yeah.
Release week is not unlike deadline week.
Uh-huh.
You're like, what are showers?
And you're just like, I need to get off the internet. And then suddenly you realize you're on the internet and you don't remember getting on the internet. And you're just like, I thought I got off the internet. How did I get here? Get off the internet.
Did you watch the Saturday Night Live? You need to go find this skit if you haven't seen it, with the girl who plays Catwoman in the new Batman movie.
Mm-mm.
But they do these new like video shorts, and these 3 writers for Saturday Night Live decide to get her a cat. And the cat in this little tiny locked door office keeps disappearing. But then every once in a while, like they'll pan over to one of the characters and they're stroking the cat. And they're like, "There's the cat," and the cat is gone. That's what it feels like on release week.
Yeah.
Where'd the cat come from? So one of my new favorite questions to ask authors is, like, what did this book teach you? Like, what was different about this book that added to how you feel about your process? Did it change your process? Did it rattle something you thought was true about who you are as a writer? Was it a gift book? Was it a slog book?
This was a problem child, this book. I wrote I think one of the real things that taught me, not that I had a problem with this before, but it gave me a brand new, very deep lesson in writer humility, where it was like I spent a lot of time writing a draft, and I hadn't even sent the draft to my editor yet. And I don't know how this came about, but she and I ended up having a phone conversation, and I was talking with her about everything. And on the phone, she pointed out all of the plot problems that didn't work. And she was 100% right. Like, this was not out of line. Like, it did not work. And I was like, and I hung up and I was like, I have to basically start over because she was totally right. So, I mean, like, it was just like, it was just one of those books where not a, you just have one every once in a while where it's just like, it's just a problem child. It's gonna give
Yeah.
you a problem everywhere you go. So I mean, I did a whole revision before I handed it into her. We did another whole revision after I handed it into her. And so I mean, I did one of the things that, like, more than any other book before, this book had revisions and major rewrites and major rearranging and deleting of giant swaths of it.
Yeah.
So
How many, for those of you who might not know, the like an average book is anywhere between 90 to maybe 110,000 words. So what did this book come in at?
I'm trying to remember. It was around like 96 or 97.
And how many words do you think in total you wrote for this book?
Probably double that.
Yeah.
Probably double that. Yeah, I probably wrote 200,000 words for it. And like a lot of it was stuff that I deleted before my editor even saw it, because I just had a lot of junk scenes where like two characters were just sitting absolutely stationary and going, this happened. Yes, I do recall that. Do you recall that this happened? Yes, I do. Like, just just stuff that's like, cut. If you're a film director, you'd be like, cut. Oh, by the way, I have beer. Cut. So there was a lot of that. I just had to go. And then when it got down to refining it, there were various things that just, when I got down into the weeds, didn't work, and those had to go. So yeah, I probably wrote double what's in this book. And it was kind of funny because by the end, my editor said, this book is like really good. And of course, by that point, you don't know. And I was like, no, I think it's terrible. And the reason I thought it was terrible was because in my head, because I had written all those terrible scenes, they were still in the book in my
Yeah.
head.
It's
I was
true.
like, no, it's got all these terrible scenes in it. She's like, no, you deleted those.
They're not there anymore.
What's that? I have no.
You're having like phantom scene pains.
Yeah, it's like someone who loses a limb and they can still feel it.
Yeah.
Like I could still read that terrible scene. It's like, no, it's long gone.
So I promised that I wouldn't ask you what the germ of this idea was, but I actually remember that you were like, I just want to write a haunted house book.
Yeah.
Like the Greer house is sort of, it's the focal point of this thing. And it's funny to hear you say what a problem child it is when you have made a career writing haunting stories. Yeah. I mean, you have a book that's coming out in a little bit that's like a haunted stretch of highway. You have haunted motels and battlegrounds in World War I. Like you have all of this, and you were like, the haunted house really got you, huh?
Yeah, it was the timelines that got me, because once I got into it, like I knew it was going to be a dual timeline book, but then once I got into it, and without any spoilers, but once I got into it, I realized that in the middle of the book, there's a section where you go into a third timeline and you stay there for a number of chapters. And it wasn't until I got to that point that I realized that's how the story needed to be told, because if I didn't have that section, it would just be the character sitting and telling everything that happened in those chapters, and like the bad scenes that I'd cut. So that was like the 50% point of the book where I was like, I'm really stumped on how to tell this the best way. That's why I had to kind of go back, reverse backwards, and then start over at that spot and figure out exactly how to tell it. And then once I got through that rocky part, the last third of the book really came together.
So my other question again, and this is because I sort of was a witness to your process writing this, and you had a long time, like you had a long, like between the contract and the deadline, it was over a year to write this book. And there are a lot of, I mean, I come out of romance. You've dabbled, you have some books that lean more towards romance, and the pace is so much faster. They want so many more books out quickly. Was 18 months the right amount of time for a book? Was it too short? Was it too long?
Yeah, it was. As I say, because the revisions were so extensive, we spent at least 6 months just on that. My
Wow.
editor and I. But I've realized with these books, and this was not something I knew as a debut writer who was releasing a book a year when I first started.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing a book a year, but now it's longer. But what I realized now, which I didn't know then, is that I actually the thinking part of my idea is a lot longer than I ever realized. Like, it's really long. Like, the idea just sort of ticks over in the back of my head for I literally don't even know how long. I don't know when I got the day I got this idea. I mean, I don't know. So it just sort of ticks over in the back of my head, and the characters kind of start showing up and appearing and talking to me, and the thoughts kind of come talking to me, and I come up with ideas and I discard them, and I'm like, maybe this happens, and a couple days later, like, no, something, no, sort of. So, but that's before I write anything down, before I pitch it to my publisher, before I tell anybody, before I make any notes. It's just ticking over in my head, and I have never really understood until like later in my process that's a long period of time for me. And of course, while that's happening, I'm working on tons of other projects, but this one's ticking over in the back of my head.
And I feel like it's the realization that takes a long time, and the value of it has really changed your books.
Yeah.
Like, your books are, I mean, not that those historical ghost stories weren't thoughtful and rich and detailed, but between Broken Girls, the Sundown Motel, and this book, like, these are deeper cuts. You know what I mean? Like, these are wider worlds. I mean, you have dual timelines with multiple characters, multiple conflicts. Like, you're writing basically two different books, really.
Yeah, and so yeah, they take longer. They take longer in the idea stage. They take longer in the writing, and they take longer in the revisions. Everything takes longer.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because then the book comes out and people go, I read it in 2 hours, and you're like, God, no, which is a super compliment. It is a huge compliment if someone devours the book in one sitting, but you're just like, dude, I can't write one of these a day, man. I can't do it.
It is like, it's a compliment and a knife to the heart at the same time. So it's funny, so Shay Collins, who's the character in 2017 who is in sort of interviewing Beth and pulling this story together, is a true crime blogger, and she has a great quote, and it's been pulled out quite a bit. Like, you see it a lot in reviews about how murder is the only healthy obsession.
Mm-hmm.
That's fabulous.
That was in the first draft, that line. I always know the lines that were in the first draft because there's so few of them. That was in my first draft, that line. They made it through all the drafts.
What a gift true crime blogging and podcasts are for your writing. like that it's such a, like, it's there's suddenly this new huge amount of investigative information, and the fact that everybody just assumes that everybody else is kind of obsessed with unsolved murders.
Yeah, I mean, and I love it, and I love true crime, and I started it a little bit with Sundown Motel, where it was like, I love this so much. Like, I would like to read a novel that reads like true crime, and you're starting to see more of them now. But at the time I started Sundown, I mean, there just wasn't a book like that, which is why I wrote it. But it was like, it's kind of fun because I don't have to rely on the details of a real crime. I just get to make it up. And the flip side of that is that I don't have to worry about, any victims of a real crime, reading what I'm writing, and I'm not profiting off, some victims, horrible story. None of the crimes in this book are remotely real. They're not based on real crimes. They're not based on real criminals. They're not based on real people. So I just get to make everything up from scratch, which also means I don't harm anyone. It's all imaginary.
Yeah, it's true. One of the things that I really love about this book is it felt like, and that I marveled as a reader and as a writer, is like how many tightropes you were walking as the author of this book. So I'm gonna bring up some things that were tightropes, and I want you to sort of, and the question I guess is, how difficult was it walking the tightrope? Did you even realize that you were walking the tightrope? How important was it to the truth of this story, and when did it all fall apart during the writing? So my big one is like, between the tightrope between ghost story and suspense novel, because you occupy such a singular space, right? Like there are not a lot of, there's tons of suspense novels, but ghost story suspense novels is not a crowded avenue. So what's your, like, going into it, what's your frame of mind between, like, this is how much ghost story there should be, this is how many scary scenes my readers expect? I remember there was a comment from your editor who was like, we need scarier scenes earlier in the book.
Right.
How hard is that?
Well, there's a little bit of that. When it comes to the ghost stories, like, I'm always trying to thematically, like, and I don't know why more writers don't do this, because this is why I write my books, because I want to read these stories. But I'm always trying to thematically make the ghost story sort of march alongside what's psychologically happening to the characters. Like, my characters are haunted. I'm not even subtle about that. I just, like, I don't have this subtle imagery. Like, my characters are haunted by stuff that's happened in their past, and things they can't get over, and grief and fear and trauma, and all their fatal flaws they can't get past. And so, my characters are very haunted, and I just mirror that with actual hauntings, because I think that sounds really cool. And so I just kind of, but it comes from,
because it's obvious. Like, why isn't everybody?
Why would you just add a real cool haunting in there? But it always comes from what the character, like, it isn't just a random thing. It always comes from what the characters are dealing with in their story arc a little bit. Just even in the sense that, like, in this book, like, the main character, one of the characters, Beth, well, both of the main characters, but like Beth Greer has stuff that's happened in her past that she has literally never gotten over, and kind of refuses to get over. And at the same time, she lives in a house where a ghost just will not leave, like, just
Right.
will not leave. And so that's just sort of mirroring her psychological situation. And so I just really love to play with that imagery, and play with, like, get really deep into how, and also, like, what a character will do if there's a haunting, because my hauntings are always real. It's never like, oh, is this person imagining it? Like, no, it is happening.
This is happening.
So what would you do? What would this character do? What would that character do? How would they act differently? Some of my characters are refuse to believe what's happening, and others are like, yeah, that was a ghost, so what am I going to do? And that's why some people are like, a lot of people tell me their ghost stories, and they're just very matter of fact about it. They're always like, I lived with my grandma, and every night before bed, we'd see a guy walk down the hallway, and he was totally harmless, and he would just walk down the hallway every night, and I was totally fine with it. I lived there for years. Like, some people are like, just matter of fact about it. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, so I just sort of incorporate that into my characters and figure out, like, how different people would react, which is kind of also what I dig into.
One of the other things that sort of, like, thematically that I love about your books, and particularly now that you've really, like, dug into this, like, 1970s, 1980s timelines that you're doing, is like women who are really fighting the institutionalized sexism that the 1970s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the flagrant misogyny and sort of, like, sexualization of women's bodies and stuff like that. And I feel like you lean into that so carefully and quietly, that you read this book, and at the end of it, you're like, you feel it, it. I was reading a review of the book, and I was like, yeah, that is what she's doing. How often, like, do you think about that a lot?
Yeah, and I think a lot about how, these types of, this patriarchy exists, but how women, like, very quietly just have their own ways around it in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And they just do what they do. And they, some women are, will stand up and, and really fight the fight. And other women are just like, you know what, you're never going to hear from me. But in the quietly in the background, I'm just going to do the thing that I do, and I'm going to teach my daughter to do that thing, and she's going to teach her daughter to do that thing. And so the women have ways around these things, and I like to explore that as well. So it's
there's a lot of ways to try to not be in that box that the
yeah,
wants.
yeah, and like, and one of the mainstays of that is female friendships and female relationships, and women form their own bonds and their own friendships and their own relationships, and they never don't tell anybody about it. They don't write about it. They don't tell men about it. That's just like, this is a bond that I have with this other woman, whoever she is, whether she's a friend or my mother or whoever, or my neighbor, whoever, my daughter. And like, they just have those bonds, and those bonds last for years, decades and lifetimes. And that's how they exist in the system, they just have their own little ecosystem amongst themselves. And so I explore that as well. It's one of the things that, it just sort of plays into the storyline without being too much.
We have a question, and I'm so sorry, whoever has asked this question. It might be our friend Stephanie, but if you don't, like, you have to do this whole rigmarole where you have to like sign up for StreamYard, and if you don't do that, then you just show up as Facebook user. So I'm so sorry, Facebook user. But you write a lot of books about very strong women. Would you ever have a man as your main protagonist?
My next book that's written has a very, very, very strong male character in it, who is a good person. He's not,
He's a gem.
That's some sort of horrible man. He's a wonderful man. He's very, very strong. And I'm putting together the book after that, which actually has a couple different protagonists, but one of the main protagonists is a man, and you are in his point of view, and he's a huge character, huge protagonist. So yes, I would do that.
Yeah. Going back to your comment about female friendships, another tightrope that I felt like you were walking was Shay and Beth. And the question of, was Beth manipulating Shay? Is Beth lying to Shay? Is Beth an unreliable narrator? Is Shay so wrapped up in her own trauma that she's not seeing things clearly? And that was like a really tricky line to walk, because you don't want Shay to not be self-aware, but she's got it. And she kind of kept, I don't trust her. I trust her. Like, how tricky was that?
Yeah, it was really tricky, but Shay is going to meet this woman who is potentially a serial killer who was acquitted. And she goes to this woman's house, and the woman's house is haunted. So, you have to motivate why she would keep going back. And so I motivated it by, like, Shay has got an obsession. Like, this is her fatal flaw. Like, she is obsessed with true crime on the side. She has a day job, and this is what she does on the side. And she has literally been given the interview of a lifetime with this woman who might be a serial killer, and has not given another interview in 40 years. Like, she has never given another interview to anybody. So this is the interview of a lifetime. And so she's like, I just am not quitting. And she doesn't, people act illogically all the time, especially when it comes to something they're obsessed with. It sounds perfectly normal in their head. Like, of course I'm going to go do this. Like, I don't understand why anyone would bungee jump, but that seems like something that people do. I don't do that. So, like, why would she go into a haunted house? Well, I don't know why do people bungee jump? You could just die. Never do that.
This is a parallel that can be made.
People act illogically when it makes sense in their head. It's something that they really want. It's something that they're
and like, she's deeply invested.
So of course she keeps going back. So I just sort of once I got deep into Shay's character, and again, this comes from the characters living in my head for quite a bit of time before I even start writing. Like, I kind of knew her by the time I started writing her.
Right.
Like, the other thing that came up was, there's a scene where Shay goes to have dinner at her sister's house, and it ends up being kind of a sweet, touching scene. Like, as she has got this complex relationship with her sister, and they love each other very much, but they're trying to figure out like what their relationship is. And like, that scene, I did not know what that scene was going to be like until I wrote it. But I knew I was like, I'm going to send Shay to her sister's house for dinner. And I knew Shay so well by that point that I just wrote that scene, and everything just kind of bubbled up. And I was like, this really works. Like, this makes sense to me. So a lot of that just comes from having spent so much time in my head with these characters by the time I write it down.
Yeah.
Beth was the same way. I spent a lot of time with Beth. I loved writing Beth. She was a blast, an absolute blast to write.
How do you know when the scary scenes work? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of, I know when an emotional scene works while I'm writing an emotional scene, but I mean, that could be because of my own, like, like a scary thing is kind of a, like, it feels like a clear, clean rubric. Like, it's scary if it's, so how do you know if it's
Right.
working?
Yeah, I don't really like objectively know, because the other thing is that, what's quote unquote scary is kind of different for every person.
Mhm.
And like, if you ever read like my reviews, you'll get the wide range from like, I absolutely was terrified. I could not read this with the lights out. And then there are other people who are like, well, it was good. I wasn't very scared, but it was good. I mean, I guess. But like, that's just subjective, right? Like, some people are just like, I don't know why. Like, it was fine. It was like not very scary. So, I just kind of I have to go with my gut, and I just have to accept the fact that not everyone's going to find scary what I find scary. I find ghosts very scary. I've never encountered a ghost. If I did, I would run away and I would never come back. I would sell my house without ever going back inside.
Burn it, just burn the thing.
Because I'm terrified of it. So to me, I just write what I find really creepy and scary, and I just know that it's going to be subjective for everybody else. And beyond that, it comes down to like what you, as one of my beta readers, would say, and what my editor would say. And sometimes as I'm revising, even to myself, I think, well, this is kind of creepy, but this could be amped up, and then I amp it up in revisions.
Okay, so when you say amp it up, I'm like, get writerly for a minute. Like, get as writerly as you think you can. Like, what does ramped up mean? I mean, as a reader of your scary scenes, like, I find this the simplest things in the scene the scariest, right? So when you're ramping up, what are you doing?
Well, I'll give you a really good example. In The Broken Girls, there is a scene where they're at a haunted girls boarding school, and the girl gets sent to detention, and she gets sent to this little room all by herself for detention. And I had that be as creepy. And then I was actually lying in bed one night, and I opened my eyes and I went, oh, I gotta add spiders. And so she's in that room, and there's these creepy spiders. So there's a difference between creepy room and creepy room with spiders.
Yeah, that's ramped up.
That's amping it up. And so I don't do that with every single scene. I remember that very clearly. I remember I'd written that scene, and there was a lot of scary stuff happening in that scene. That's actually a really chilling scene, just psychologically.
Very chilling.
Then I remember lying in bed staring at the ceiling going, spiders. It's gonna have spiders. It was one of those eureka moments as a writer. It's like, spiders.
So do you have a sense when a scary scene isn't working?
Yeah, I do. And if usually in the first draft, it reads a lot like something I've written before, and I'm like, oh god, I'm recycling. I can't do another spider scene. Like, I can never do another spider scene, right?
So or the smell of cigarette smoke, you can't do that again either.
The ice machine at the motel, So yeah, if I did, like, if it sounds a little like I'm recycling imagery, then what I do is I kind of I let the scene simmer for a little bit in my mind, and I come up with something that's a little fresher and more original, and then I attack it again on a different day. And usually that works, because usually at that point I also come up with something psychological that's going on that's adding to
Isn't that always the truth, right? Like, if something's not working, you're probably not getting the emotion, the underlying, like,
that's right,
psychology quite right.
That's kind of just doing some cheap tricks. Yeah. I mean, the spiders were there, but if you've ever read that book, like, there's other stuff going on. Like, she is a problem child who has been pulled out of class and shoved into this detention. Like, there's a whole psychological thing going on. She's all alone. No one believes this ghost is there. So, like, there's a whole psychological aspect. It's not just sort of like a fun house kind of thing. And the spiders are just an added layer. So yeah, usually you're missing something in the underlying layers of what's going on with the character and in their head and their situation.
I will say there's a scene in the Book of Cold Cases, and tell me if I'm wrong or if it changed a whole bunch. But you have the scene where Shay's really experiencing the haunted house kind of for the first time, and she's scared and freaked out. And what ramped it up is that she looks over and she sees that Beth is scared as well. Like that she's like that she sees it and it's affecting her too. The cups, the glass is moving.
Right. Yeah, I think I revised that a bit because I wanted to make Beth Beth has been living in that house for so long she's kind of numb. So I made Beth a lot more numb in those scenes, and because it's from Shay's point of view, she can't read Beth very well. But I also added in scenes. There are actually added in scenes that are purely just from Beth's point of view, where you see what she's like when she's alone in the house and there's no one there, and it's a whole separate thing from what she shows to the outside world. Like she shows to the outside world this very blank, very controlled persona. But I added in scenes without Shay there. I added scenes where Beth is alone in the house, completely alone in the house. And then you see a bit more of how this house affects her psychologically when she's alone.
We have another question. You talk a lot about writing. Sorry, thank you, Facebook user. Feel free to put your name at the end of the question. You talk a lot about writing scenes. Do you think the scenes come first and you just pull them together, or do you know the whole book before you start writing?
I definitely don't know the whole book scene by scene when I start writing. I mean, I know a very, very high level arc of kind of what the answer to the mystery is, and kind of who these people are and where they come from and what the setting is, and kind of how it ends up. And that's because my publisher needs to know that before they give me the go ahead. They want to know that they like the story, but really high level stuff. It's not scene by scene. So once I get into the book, no, the scenes start coming to me once I'm really into the writing process and I'm really inside these characters' heads. And sometimes I'll even have an idea, like, I think I'm going to do a scene that has XYZ. I think about it for a couple of days, and then suddenly I'll discard it and something better will come into my head. And then that's when I know, like, I've hit on the right thing.
Right.
So I would say that when I'm writing my books, aside from the really high level arc, I kind of know the next 4 to 5 chapters, what those are going to look like kind of in some detail in my head. But beyond that, for those 4 or 5 chapters, I'm not entirely sure, like minute by minute, what's going to be happening. And how each scene's going to open and how it's going to close and that kind of thing.
Our Facebook user is, guys, it's me.
That's got to be Steph.
So what are you working on now? What can you tell us about? I mean, I know that your schedule is one of the craziest schedules that I have come across in my wide writing experience with these interviews. Like, you're writing a book that's not coming out until like 20.
I finished my next book. I don't have an official release date for it yet. We've agreed on a title, but I haven't been given the go-ahead to tell anyone the title. I will say that it's a single timeline, and it's about a couple who takes a wrong turn and they pick up the wrong hitchhiker on the wrong road, and everything is haunted and it goes very wrong. And so that's happening. I also have another thing that I've, again, not been given the go-ahead to actually give details about, but there is going to be a little surprise something coming out before the end of this year, 2022. There's going to be a surprise.
Oh, wow. Oh, good. That's coming up. That's great. That's great. I will say this too, for people who might be listening and are like, man, I don't know, it sounds really scary. One of the things that I really like about your books is, I'm not going to say happily ever after, but it does not end. They do not end in despair. People end more healed than when they start.
Yeah, and that's based on the kind of book that I want to read. I wanted to read a book that where the author pushes you to that edge of being creeped out, but doesn't like just kill everybody off in horrible ways and then you just feel awful. And I just didn't want, and then kind of pulls you back from that edge, and the characters sort of, they come back from that. And the only one spoiler I will give out, and I will give this out because I get asked, there's a cat in this book and the cat does not die. Okay. The cat does not die. And if you ever read one of my books and there is a cat or a dog in it, do not kill the cat or the dog. I am incapable of writing that scene. It will never happen because I had a couple readers like message me and they were like, I'm halfway through this book and there's a cat. And if you kill this cat, I'm closing this book right now and I'm never reading you again. And I'm like, I swear on my life, the cat is fine.
The Simone St. James promise.
It is my promise. That's the only spoiler I'll give out. Relax. The cat is fine. He is awesome and he lives a very happy life for the rest of his life. I won't tell you about any other characters, but the cat is fine.
My daughter has found my favorite murder.
Mm-hmm.
So we were listening to this podcast today as we're driving somewhere, and it's one of the ones where they write in. If you have not listened to my favorite murder podcast and you're a true crime fan, it's the Motherwell where they all sprung from, but they've turned it into, you can kind of write in with these crazy stories and they sort of laugh about it. And Lucy loves those. And the one today that we listened to was this woman in Australia. There had been in her town or in her area a string of brutal rapes and murders of young girls and their cats. Yeah. And and her father was the number one suspect. So much so that the kids were removed from the house and had to go to these different schools. He had the same make and model car that was seen at the crime scene. He did not have an alibi. He had a criminal record. His wife got ill in the middle of the anyway, all of that to say, the cats did not survive that one. But
you're like, my dad is not only a serial killer, but he's a cat serial killer.
I know. Like Lucy,
it's horrifying.
Like, not fazed so much by the murdering of 13-year-old girls.
That's bad. But he's been killing cats.
And their cats. I'm glad you're not doing that. So if you have not tried a Simone St. James in fear of these chilling scenes, trust me, they're pretty delicious. Although I will say I read one. My daughter was at camp on the Toronto Islands. It was the middle of the day. I was sitting in sunlight reading your book, and there was like a big bell that gonged, and I screamed. So they are good and scary, but they end in a comforting way, and no cats get harmed.
That's what I like to read.
There you go. Simone, thank you so much for taking the time and coming in chat. You're like, what? We're done so early?
I know. I've got like 10 more beers to drink. I'm just kidding. I drank one.
I did not have a beer because I'm trying not to drink so much.
Yeah. So am I. That's why I just had one. It's like a light. It's called Peroni. It's like an Italian beer. Oops, it's like an Italian beer. It's like super light. It's like really
not nice. Our usual style, huh?
Well, we have had our moments.
We're
trying not to have too many of those moments anymore. We're too old.
We're too old. We're too old. Thank you again, Simone. But we could chat for days. Thank you for coming. Good luck with the rest of all the release stuff. I know you're packed to the gills, and everybody out there, pick up a book of cold cases, have a drink, read a book, stay safe, everybody.
Bye.